Welcome. So let's talk about Strixhaven Spoilers. By the way, I'm Eric, and this is the Commander's Beacon. So today we're talking about Plargg, Dean of Chaos. This is a 2/2 legendary orc shaman that costs 1 and a red. You can tap it and discard a card to draw a card. You can also pay 4 and a red and tap it to reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary, non-land card with mana value 3 or less. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put all revealed cards not cast this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, Plargg is one of those MDFCs, and the back half of the card is Augusta, Dean of Order, a legendary human cleric that costs 2 and a white, and for the purposes of today's discussion, Augusta says, add white to your deck's color identity. And that's all we're going to say about Augusta because I really want to focus on Plargg's second activated ability. So there are a few things you can do with Plargg, but the most unique idea floating around right now is to build a deck filled mostly with legendary cards and non-legendaries that have mana value 4 or more. Then when you activate Plargg's second ability, you've built a deck that will contain maybe just one or just a few very specific cards that Plargg will find for you. So this is very cool, but before we can take advantage of Plargg's second ability to find very specific cards, we need to build our deck so that we only have a few non-legendary, non-land cards with mana value 3 or less. By the way, this is going to make it very hard for us to do some very basic things earlier than turn 4, like ramp or remove threats. Because any non-legendary ramp we use that costs 3 or less mana, for example, will be a potential target for Plargg to find, which is probably not what we want. Now, there are a very small number of legendary card draw and ramp spells that we can use without interfering with Plargg's second ability. Some of these are situational, but you'll definitely want to include them in a Plargg deck when they make sense with the rest of your deck strategy. Now, for ramp cards, we can use Mox Amber and Mox Opal, which of course are legendary. Sword of the Animist is a great include here too. This equipment ramps us whenever the equipped creature attacks, and it's actually legendary as well, which I wasn't aware of until just now. The new Plargg, God of Storytelling from Kaldheim, of course, ramps us for 1 red whenever we cast a spell. And if we're playing with a lot of creatures, there's Oketra's Monument and Hazoret's Monument, which reduce the cost of white and red creatures we cast, respectively, by 1 mana. And again, all of these are legendary, so Plargg won't find these cards by mistake when we activate his second ability. Now there's also Captain Lannery Storm and Magda Brazen Outlaw, which create treasure tokens to help ramp us, but we'll generally have to attack with them to do so, which won't always be profitable for us if our opponents have blockers. Now as far as card draw is concerned, we're pretty limited, unless we want to pay 4 or more mana for it of course, or risk hitting it with Plargg's activated ability. SRAM Senior Edificer, of course, can draw a bunch of cards for us, but only if we play with a lot of auras, equipment, or vehicles. Azor's Gateway and Sarkhan Fireblood don't generate strict card advantage for us, but they do give us card selection. And again, these are legendary. They're not great, but if we really want to draw cards before turn 4 without diluting the effect of Plargg's second activated ability, we don't have many options. And that's probably the most difficult part about building around Plargg. But now that we've gone over the drawback to building around Plargg's second ability, what kind of reward can we expect from such a deck? Now the first thing that comes to mind for me when playing a Boros deck with Plargg in the command zone is playing with a hidden commander. A hidden commander is typically a non-legendary card or just some other card that can't be in your command zone, and you might build your whole deck around this card. For example, I've built a deck with Sunforger as the hidden commander, because of course Sunforger can't go in your command zone. And with a very specific build of a Plargg deck, Plargg could essentially tutor Sunforger right onto the battlefield for just 5 mana, if you're okay with not playing any other non-legendary, non-land cards that have mana value 3 or less. So being able to use your commander to find your hidden commander is pretty valuable. In my Sunforger deck, for example, I've got around a dozen cards in the deck dedicated solely to finding and protecting the Sunforger. But with Plargg, you can always find your hidden commander, so you won't need any extra tutors. Now this is just my first look at Plargg, so I don't have any specific strategies to recommend yet. But there are a bunch of impactful and flavorful non-legendary non-land cards that you could build around using Plargg to tutor them out. I'm just going to list a bunch of them here. This list isn't exhaustive, but as you'll see, there are a bunch of options. So with Plargg, you could build a hidden commander deck around any of the following non-legendary non-land cards that have mana value 3 or less. There's Crucible of Worlds, Extraplanar Lens, Isochron Scepter, Imperial Recruiter, Land Tax, Rings of Brighthearth, Blood Moon, Cloudstone Curio, Eldrazi Displacer, Illusionist's Bracers, Core Spirit Dancer, Magerite Stone, Magistrate Scepter, Mark of Asylum, Pariah, Pyre of Heroes, Recruiter of the Guard, Sacred Mesa, Scrapyard Recombiner, Solemnity, Staff of Domination, Stoneforge Mystic, Sundial of the Infinite, Sunforger, Terra Eternal, Thousand Year Elixir, Weathered Wayfarer, and Winter Orb. Okay, so with that list out of the way, and again, this list definitely is not exhaustive, so please speak up in the comments if you have any other ideas for cards that you could build around with Plargg. But I want to go into a little bit more detail on a couple of the cards on this list. At first we mentioned Isochron Scepter, which seems cool, but if you include too many instants with mana value 2 or less in your deck, then it'll be harder to find the Scepter with Plargg's activated ability instead of, say, finding one of those instants. So I'm not actually sure that Isochron Scepter is a great build around with Plargg, but definitely let me know if you have any ideas that'll let you use the Scepter with Plargg, since Isochron Scepter is definitely a really strong card that you could build around. Now, cards like Imperial Recruiter, Scrapyard Recombiner, and Stoneforge Mystic are tutors that you can find with Plargg, so now you can build around a larger number of cards that Plargg might not be able to find alone. For example, Imperial Recruiter has an Enters the Battlefield effect that lets you search your library for any creature with power 2 or less and put it into your hand. So if you really want to build around a non-legendary creature that has power 2 or less, but mana value greater than 3, or you really want to build around another legendary creature that has power 2 or less, then Imperial Recruiter can find that card. And Plargg can find Imperial Recruiter. So for example, if you want to build around another legendary creature, maybe a mono white or a mono red one, but you still want access to Boros colors, maybe you want to build a Torbran deck that has access to both red and white, you can do that with Plargg in the command zone and Imperial Recruiter in your deck. Now, if there's a construct creature that you want to build around, Scrapyard Recombiner can find it, and again, Plargg can find Scrapyard Recombiner. If you want to build around an equipment that Plargg can't find, maybe it has a mana value of 4 or greater, or it's a legendary equipment, then Stoneforge Mystic can find it, and again, Plargg can find Stoneforge Mystic. And finally, I mentioned Sunforger earlier, and while you can definitely use Plargg to find Sunforger, remember that Sunforger finds instants that have mana value 4 or less, which means if you want Plargg to reliably find Sunforger, you'll need to refrain from including too many instants with mana value 3 or less in your deck, which means that your Sunforger targets will mostly have to be instants that cost exactly 4 mana, so just be aware of that. So anyways, I think Plargg has strong potential in building a hidden commander deck, but the deck building restrictions to make it work are pretty severe. But this does sound like a really interesting challenge. However, there are other ways that we can play with Plargg. By building a very restricted deck with only a very few specific non-legendary non-land cards with mana value 3 or less in the deck, we can use Plargg to assemble game-winning combos. Now, I don't typically build combo decks, and I'm preparing this video fairly quickly as it's a spoiler, so I'll give a few examples of 2 to 3 card combos that you can build around with Plargg, but you may definitely be able to identify stronger or easier combos too. Also note that 2 card combos are especially effective with Plargg, since we can activate Plargg at the end of the turn right before ours to get the first card in the combo, then activate him again during our turn to get the second card in the combo. so we'll give our opponents very little time to respond. One example of a combo we can build around with Plargg is Possibility Storm and Dranith Magistrate. Possibility Storm is an enchantment that says whenever a player casts a spell from their hand, that player exiles it, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a card that shares a card type with it. That player may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then they put all cards exiled with Possibility Storm on the bottom of their library in a random order. So Possibility Storm essentially replaces every spell that's cast with another spell of the same type from that player's library. Now, Dranith Magistrate prevents opponents from casting spells from anywhere other than their hands. So combined with Possibility Storm, this means your opponents can't cast spells, or at least they can't resolve spells. But wait, how can we build this combo, you might ask? Plargg only finds cards with mana value 3 or less, and Possibility Storm has a mana value of 5. Well, Plargg can find something like Idyllic Tutor, which of course we can use to find Possibility Storm. Another example of a combo that Plargg can assemble is Famished Paladin, Soul Warden, and Elemental Mastery. Famished Paladin is a creature that doesn't untap normally, but it does untap whenever you gain life. Soul Warden causes you to gain 1 life whenever a creature enters the battlefield, and Elemental Mastery is an aura that lets the enchanted creature tap to create X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste, where X is the enchanted creature's power. And you exile those tokens at the end of the turn. So if we enchant Famished Paladin with Elemental Mastery, we can then tap it to make 3 hasty 1/1 elemental tokens. We'll gain 3 life with Soul Warden, so Famished Paladin will untap. So we can tap it again, make more elementals, and so on. And so we'll have infinite hasty creature tokens. And just like with Possibility Storm, we can't find Elemental Mastery with Plargg, but we can find a tutor for it, like Enlightened Tutor. And actually the fact that we can't find Elemental Mastery with Plargg is good for us here, because Plargg only lets us cast what we find randomly, not put the card into our hand, so we won't be able to control the order in which we resolve our combo pieces. And in this case, the order in which we cast them definitely matters, since we need Famished Paladin on the battlefield before we cast Elemental Mastery. There's plenty of other combos that Plargg can assemble too. For example, Rings of Brighthearth plus Basalt Monolith gives you infinite mana. Midnight Guard plus Splinter Twin gives you infinite hasty creatures. Dockside Extortionist plus Goblin Bombardment plus Sigil of the New Dawn gives you infinite mana and infinite damage, provided your opponents have at least 3 artifacts and enchantments between them. Those are just some examples. I'm sure there's plenty of other combos as well, but we'd be here all day if I tried to cover every possible one, and I'm pretty sure I'd miss a lot of them. Do note, of course, that we can't reliably use combos that require either legendary creatures, which Plargg can't find, or maybe some other non-legendary non-land permanent with mana value 4 or greater, which we don't have a tutor available for, which Plargg can find. Because white and red can tutor for artifacts and enchantments easily, but we won't necessarily be able to tutor for instants, sorceries, or creatures unless we use Gamble, which is, of course, a gamble. But I do want to make one more point about Gamble as long as we've mentioned it. If you're okay with that risk, using Plargg to find Gamble will let you build a deck around literally any other card in Burrow's colors as long as it has CMC 4 or greater, or is a legendary or land card. And of course, if that card that you want to build around doesn't meet these requirements, then Plargg can already find it anyways, so you can still build around it. So we can really build around any single card in Burrow's colors with Plargg in the command zone. So playing Gamble might be worth the risk. Now the last thing I want to talk about that Plargg might enable is a cycling deck. Because if we're taking advantage of Plargg's second ability to tutor very specific cards out of the deck, then we won't be able to include very many non-legendary non-land cards with mana value 3 or less in our deck. So to avoid having nothing to do on our early turns, like casting ramp or card draw spells that have mana cost 3 or less, we can cycle cards instead. There are currently 40 cards in Burrow's colors that have cycling and have mana value 4 or greater, so Plargg won't accidentally find them. So if we draw these during the early game, we can just cycle them. Now, if you're still building around Plargg's second ability, there are some great cycling payoffs that Plargg can reliably find for us. Lightning Rift lets us pay 1 whenever we cycle a card, and if we do, it deals 2 damage to any target. A Fluctuator reduces the cost of all of our cycling abilities by 2 generic mana, and that means a lot of cards will now cycle for free, which is silly. Astral Drift and Astral Slide let us annoy our opponents by exiling a creature every single time we cycle a card, and that exiled creature returns to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So this can prevent creatures from attacking us, we can dodge removal aimed at our own creatures, or just trigger extra enters the battlefield effects on our creatures. In fact, we can so reliably find Astral Drift or Astral Slide with Plargg that we can include some creatures with powerful ETBs just because we know we'll be able to trigger them repeatedly. Rooting Moloch and Spellpire Phoenix are 2 examples that have cycling themselves. When Rooting Moloch enters the battlefield, you exile target card with a cycling ability from your graveyard. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. And when Spellpire Phoenix enters the battlefield, you may return target instant or sorcery card with a cycling ability from your graveyard to your hand, which is silly because if you cycle an instant or sorcery to blink Spellpire Phoenix with Astral Drift, then Spellpire Phoenix's ETB effect can bring that cycling card right back to your hand to do it again. There's Stormcaller, which pings each opponent for 2 damage when it enters the battlefield, and it costs us 3 mana, so guess what? Plargg can find this creature for you too. I'm sure there are other good combos here that I haven't thought of as well. Now, there are other cycling payoffs that Plargg can find, but which aren't as strong, like Drannith Healer, which gains you 1 life whenever you cycle a card, or Savai Thundermane, a 3/2 creature which lets you pay 2 when you cycle a card, and then it deals 2 damage to target creature, and you gain 2 life. And if you're building a cycling deck around Plargg, you'll need to decide how many of these cycling payoffs you want to include. Because if you have too many, it'll become harder for you to use Plargg to find the specific one that you need when you need it. Anyways, those are my initial thoughts on Plargg, Dean of Chaos. Plargg's second activated ability can let you tutor very specific cards out of your deck, which is a pretty rare ability to have in the command zone. But the deck building restrictions that are needed to make this work are severe, and I look forward to seeing what kind of solutions players come up with. Of course, we can also build a deck around Plargg's first ability, tapping and discarding a card to draw a card, and we haven't even talked about the other side of the MDFC, Augusta, Dean of Order. But I really wanted to focus on Plargg, and specifically Plargg's second ability for now. But that's all I have for today. Check back in soon as I'll be coming out with more Strixhaven spoiler videos focused on Commander. Now, there are a couple of the Commander 2021 face commanders that I want to talk about too, but I'm going to wait until full deck lists have been spoiled, because the Commander decks will generally include quite a few new cards. I don't think I can say too much of value about these commanders and what they can do until we see what new cards they'll have access to. Anyways, that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching.